Okay, I think we're live as far as I know. I don't see anyone watching, but the counter's going. And okay, one person. Yeah, I figured I would do an impromptu live stream since it's been a while. I think the last one I did was interrupted. It's about a month ago, so I figured I would try and do a live in the wake of all of the news that's been occurring. I was thinking of the Brittany Griner situation, and it reminded me of all of these. I'm not sure you're familiar with this, but there was the show called Locked Up Abroad, and like most of these documentary crime shows, it had a very simple premise that was repeated over and over for dozens or hundreds of episodes. I forget how long it ran, but the basic plot was an American. It was always an American citizen was was going to some country either for business or pleasure for vacation, and they were somehow inveigled into transporting drugs, or in some cases it was a Muslim country and they were persuaded to transport alcohol into the country. Cut to 3, 4, 5 months later, they're reviewed to be they're reviewed to have this contraband. They're arrested. They have to find some way to escape from that country or be released from prison inside of Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Singapore or the Netherlands. I think Holland was one of the countries that was was the was at the crux of the plot of one episode. And I don't think people the main takeaway I had from that was how ignorant a lot of Americans who travel abroad are. You would assume if someone travels overseas, they have some rudimentary understanding of the laws of the countries that they're traveling to. For example, if they're living in Saudi Arabia, they'll understand that it's governed by Sharia and that there are certain things that are prescribed by that country's government, or that, or the basic idea that hey, Tower Time, or the basic idea that if you can't transport drugs into a country, even if it's the most progressive, uh, liberal, even if it's one of these ridiculous countries that where the men pee sitting on the toilet like they do in Sweden, and it's encouraged. Even in these countries, you can't transport narcotics into the country. Hey, GW, but this is something that is an epiphany to the people in this program, locked up abroad, that you can't just transport drugs into any country illegally. It doesn't matter if it's the Netherlands or Singapore or Russia. Of course, there'll be harsher consequences for doing it within certain countries like Singapore or Russia, but you can't do it anywhere. Um, and you think it would have occurred to them, but they just through a process of you know just through a process of logic, if you can't transport drugs into the United States, illegal drugs, you probably it should be something you can't do it you can't do it when you're traveling to other countries. But this is something that's a revelation to the people in this program. And I think that was the main conceit of the program, just basically ignorant Americans. I think they might have had some Canadians as well. I can't remember the exact, but usually Americans travel somewhere in South America or the Middle East or Southeast Asia or Europe, and they get arrested for doing. Now, sometimes the episodes actually did profile people who were imprisoned, uh, imprisoned illegitimately. Like they were not actually violating any laws. They were simply targeted because of their nationality or because they did something that offended a local bureaucrat. But for the most part, it was people who broke the law knowingly and were punished for punished for it. And that's what the Brittany Griner situation reminds me of. If you're if you're going to Russia, and this is the weird thing, they're trying to frame it as some sort of persecution of an LGBT person, but if you look at this rationally, why would someone who knows that the laws in Russia are not LGBT friendly in the first place, and that it's looked upon, it's not celebrated. They don't have an entire month devoted to celebrating gay people and lesbians in Russia. So if you're already aware of this and you've been working there partially over the past 6 or 7 years, why would you attract undue attention to yourself? Why would you smuggle a hash pipe, or I think it was a vape pen with hashish or something enclosed in it? Why would you do that? And someone pointed this out: the fact that as dumb as LeBron James is, and generally speaking, his entourage, he probably would not do something this egregiously stupid or arrogant. Uh, so it's hard to muster a lot of sympathy for this situation. Although I disagree um with the conservatives who think that we shouldn't really. First of all, the Victor Bout, the so-called Merchant of Death that they're talking about, is slated to be released in 6 or 7 years. So he's not serving a life sentence in an American prison. So releasing him in return for several Americans um, being detained in another country is not such an outlandish request, not such an outlandish idea. Especially since I think he a lot of the stories surrounding him are exaggerated. He's described as, no doubt he's not a uh, he's not a moral or morally upstanding individual. He's an arms dealer. He traffics in weapons to conflict regions, but he was not an enemy of the United States. He wasn't supplying Al Qaeda or ISIS with weapons, unlike the U.S. government, which literally gave jihadist groups in Syria and in Libya small arms and explosives and all sorts of weapons that were then used to maim and murder innocent people. So, hey, Kathy. So um, the idea that you're imperiling the world by releasing Victor about 6 years earlier than he would have been released. I'm very skeptical of that notion, and I think you should. If there are Americans held overseas, even if they're there by their own stupidity, as is the case with Brittany Griner, I think you should do everything within reason to release them. And releasing someone who's an arms dealer and a Russian intelligence asset, I don't think it's beyond the ken. You know, it's not a huge deal, especially when you consider some of the things that our government has done to endanger the safety of not only Americans but other people overseas. So I don't think it's a big deal, and I think doing anything within reason to get Americans released is not a bad is not a bad use of resources of the federal government, especially when you consider what the federal what the federal government does most of the time. But as people pointed out, this is a rarity. There are probably over 1,000 Americans overseas imprisoned on different charges. And again, most of them, like in the Locked Up Abroad show, most of them are there by their own negligent actions. They've done something to break the laws of the countries they're in. And the US State Department advises that they can't do anything to secure their release. So it's not it's very rare that you have a situation where the US government goes out of its way to secure the release of a prisoner or someone being held captive or hostage. I mean, so there are examples like the diplomat Foley and Daniel Pearl, and there have been cases in China where American citizens have been detained illegitimately, where the government has tried to intervene. And I think there was even a Chinese American citizen whose family brought this up, the fact that they're still suffering and the U.S. isn't marshaling enough resources to secure that person's release, whereas all of this ink is being spilled on a very entitled, ungrateful American who probably won't be grateful that even when she's released, grateful for the resources expended in order to secure her release. I thought it was kind of hilarious what Tim Dillon said. The one thing, like I said, I agree, releasing the other American who's prisoner there, um, you know, yeah, the government should try to achieve that in spite of all of the blundering of the Biden administration in making Russia into an actual enemy, even though we're not in a declared war with Russia. They've done everything to ensure that we ensure that it's impossible to even have diplomatic relations with them, and to do something like this, which is engage in a prisoner swap, which we've done in the past with the Soviet Union. So I think that's legit. But I agree with Tim Dillon. Like I kind of the one thing I would request is if this does happen, that she become uber patriotic. That when she touches down on American soil, she turns into Candace Owens and try or at the very least tries to muster some gratitude for all of the energy and resources that were marshaled on her behalf, despite the fact that she's in prison largely because of her own stupidity. This is something that but I don't see that. I don't see that happening. But regardless, I do think it's, exchanging Victor Bout, or even securing the release of this intelligence agent who assassinated a Chechen separatist who killed him in Germany. I don't think that's. I mean, and you have to cut through some of the propaganda here. Like even that, the way it was described, it was almost as if it was described as releasing a murderer. So it was framed as if this guy walked into a nightclub and just stabbed a random German citizen, not was there on a targeted assassination plot. And Russians, it is obnoxious. It's a violation of sovereignty, uh, and the Russian government is, obnoxious to deal with. But again, I don't think even that would be a step too far if it secures the release of Americans. I mean, we brought John Walker Lind, the American Talib, back to the United States, and he was complicit in the killing of a CIA operative. Like another American. So I don't think it's that bizarre to try to secure the release of America again, even if it's probably the least sympathetic American that you could think of, for at least from our perspective. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Thanks, Kathy. Tower Time GW. Hopefully, I can do this more often and try to beat the heat. I'll see you later. Bye.